Mr. Akash. Yes, we have sorted out the issue now. So we'll give you a heads up before we go live in just 1 minute or so. Yeah, we apologize for the delay. It was like last minute. We had a small issue on our side with the OBS. That's the thing, like, and it's there.
Everybody, this is Creative Circuit 2.0 from AIESEC based in the University of Sri Junkyard, and I am Akash from Junkyard Theory, and I will be moderating this panel. So I got the very special Morgan Muta on board. Morgan has worked on multiple projects in Hollywood, ranging from TV series like Grimm, Shrill to movies like Predator, X-Men Origins, Wolverine, and we have her in the house today. Morgan, thank you so much for joining, and Ayubowan.
Ayubowan. Thanks for having me. Hope I didn't butcher that too badly.
No, you nailed it. Morgan, I would love to talk, hear a bit about, like, how did you get into the industry? Like, special effects makeup, has this always been a passion of yours? And if so, like, where did you start? Talk to me about your origin story.
Okay, well, I think I always knew I wanted to do effects. I've always been a fan of film in general, and especially horror, and probably was exposed to stuff at a much younger age than I should have been. So it got my wheels turning, and I didn't know how to go about doing it. I didn't know the first thing. I didn't grow up in Hollywood, so my first instinct was to go to cosmetology school when I graduated high school. And after that, I got an internship with the owner of a local small cosmetic company who kind of helped introduce me to some of the basics. And then when I was 21, I decided to make the leap, and I enrolled in makeup school. I went to cinema makeup school in Koreatown in Los Angeles. So I picked up my stuff and I went, and I definitely gravitated toward effects, had a great time. And then I ended up getting an internship at Amalgamated Dynamics effects studio right outside of school. And then basically just continued to work and grow for about the next 6.5 years down in Los Angeles before I relocated to Portland.
That's awesome. And talk to me a little bit about your process. So whenever you get on a show, how do you start? Like, do you start off based on the script or the concept art, or is it like a combination of both, or like one after the other? Who do you kind of, talk to regarding what kind of look they're going for?
It's definitely a kind of a community involvement, and it depends on the structure. Sometimes we'll come into a project where the producer or director might have a really clear vision of what they want to see, and it's just maybe about us adapting that. And that might mean that we do some mock-ups typically like creature mock-ups are done in ZBrush or Illustrator. And then we kind of try to do a marriage of illustration with what we can do practically. But sometimes, Grimm is a good example that there was a lot of creative freedom in that show. And so often they would look to the makeup effects team to kind of just mock something up that they felt. And it was always script driven, just to clarify. But then, the script was usually pretty vague on what the aesthetic would be. And then we'll go from there.
Makeup, prosthetics, all of these, plus like so many other roles in the industry, like they are, underappreciated. And that's like one of the key focus areas, with this panel is to kind of bring out like the effort that you guys go to in order to, make productions like look the way that they do. And especially series like Grimm, like without the special effects guys, there's only so much that CGI can kind of push the limits to without looking fake. And CGI has been, increasing in realism in the past few years. But at the same time, nothing still holds like having it in camera. So could you talk to us a little bit about, how underappreciated your job roles are, and how they kind of mix with computer-generated imagery?
Well, I thank you for complimenting practical arts, and I'm definitely a fan of practical arts. And I think that working synergistically with CG has been something that we've been doing basically since I even got into the business. And I think it's a really great tool. I think the first person that comes to mind, who I've never actually had the pleasure to work with yet, is Guillermo del Toro. When I think about like a movie like Pan's Labyrinth that had so much practical effects, but then also a lot of merging with green screen within the same creature, which kind of allowed both departments to push the boundaries of the other departments. So I'm definitely not afraid of CG. I think it's a great tool to use. And I think it's ideal when we can get together as departments and say, how can we work together? And so sometimes that might mean something as blatant as, we're painting part of our suit green, to something subtle like we're putting tracking dots onto our prosthetics so that they can just take it into post and do some, transformation in that. There's a big gamut of what that dynamic is.
When it comes to that, so what departments do you guys kind of coordinate? Is it the VFX supervisor comes on board, or do you guys just have chats with the director, or what's that dynamic like?
Usually we will pre-establish a plan, and some VFX folks like different approaches. So it depends on the person. So it depends on what they would prefer for tracking, for example. But it's, usually an initial conversation with the VFX supervisor. And then often there will be a representative there to help kind of take a look at what's being shot and make sure that it's usable for them.
Gotcha. I want to go backtrack a little bit to where you studied cinema makeup school. Uh, Talk to me a bit about this, because I've seen these guys. They had a stall, like multiple times at Comic-Con, and I see the artists like putting on prosthetics like live, like people are watching, and they're unfazed. They go about doing their job, and sometimes you return like 4 hours later, and you realize, oh, so this is what they were actually working on, because you see the process, and then you see the final product. That's just it's insane, and it's a process that takes quite a lot of time. So getting that education from a place like the cinema makeup school, how has that kind of contributed to your growth, I guess?
Well, that was huge for me. I think for a couple of reasons, not just the practical education that I got, but also as someone who wasn't from Hollywood, it gave me an opportunity to expose myself to really talented instructors and do a lot of networking in the community that I wanted to build a career in. We didn't, school, I think in general, is a limited, snapshot of what life outside of school is in any profession. So it was just snippets of kind of what was to come. We weren't doing, a lot of large scale suits in school or large scale pieces, but we definitely learned the fundamentals that enabled me to build on that. I learned the fundamentals of shop work in an effects lab, so that I can take my effects from start to finish by myself, which is a great skill set to have. And yeah, I think it was a really positive thing for me to go to school. I think it was positive for me to have structure and just really a lot of exposure that I couldn't have gotten on my own.
With regards to all the makeup, the chemicals, all that stuff that you guys deal with, you do oscillate between handling safe materials and sometimes stuff that can be quite hazardous as well. So a thorough knowledge of all of this is very vital, I'm assuming, before you get into actually applying makeup on anybody. So could you talk to us a little bit about this as well, like the hazards that do come with your job, chemicals, all of that stuff?
Yeah, I actually, it's not, I don't often get asked that, but it's definitely a significant part of the job. And it's a challenge of the job. And it is exposure to, for example, a lot of similar chemicals used in the boat and marine industry. It's in industrial mold making, and there's a lot of fiberglass, and so there's a really big need to, I think, be conscious of that. And especially as a super motivated young person in the early 20s, I think it's important to stop and take a look at your environment and make sure that you're advocating for yourself and being smart and behaving in a way that can take you another 20 years in this business and not cut that time short. And, unfortunately, I think that the topic of production safety in general is something that has been in the news a lot lately, at least in the US. And I think what is coming to light is that filmmaking is not an industry that's regulated like a lot of other industries are. We do very, unique type of occupational work. And I think it's important sometimes to take a step back and remember that sometimes the stuff we work with is very serious and can be dangerous.
On the note of what you just mentioned, the occupation that we do is quite, it's unique in a way. Anything pretty much in the film industry is kind of unique. And, over here in Sri Lanka, you have this thing where, you tell your parents you're going to become a doctor, a lawyer, engineer. Oh, that's great. But then you say anything kind of like in the arts field, that's when the frowns start coming in. They're like, what is it? What does that occupation entail? There's it's I guess kind of a lack of ignorance combined with some cultural elements in there too. But have you faced anything of the sort coming from the West? When you said you wanted to do this, or have you seen anyone go through that? And if so, how did you guys kind of overcome that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, while we have cultural differences between the US and Sri Lanka, I would say that the sentiment, especially from, at least my family personally, was definitely concerned for my, well-being and ability to not just survive, but thrive and build a legitimate career for myself. And it was scary for me too. And I'd said when I graduated high school, I didn't know the first thing about what path to take to get here and if it was really a viable career. And so it was very cool to find out that it was. I just really had to, make an effort to surround myself with the people that were doing what I wanted to be doing and kind of set my sights at higher caliber projects that I think would help me build a better career. But it was also, on a side note, it was also very difficult being a female. On top of that, being in effects is less so now, but still a very male dominated industry. And so there were challenges, and I still see females, confront those challenges and maybe have to prove themselves in unique ways.
I think that's a problem that's pretty much prevalent, all around the world. Something that we essentially try to do is make sure we have a balanced number of males and females on set, and that, when everyone comes onto set, they're all filmmakers irrespective of gender. It's something that kind of has to, I hope, things are evolving, and hopefully things will get to a much better place in terms of representation and also safety, like we were talking about before. That's paramount. With makeup again, you guys go through multiple tests. So during the pre-production process, until you kind of nail down a look, you are essentially catering to the director's vision. And I'm assuming you go multiple tests, you go through various iterations up until you arrive at something that the director is happy about. So again, this is quite overlooked. Not many people see anything besides what goes on, what ends up on the final film. So talk to me a bit about that process of arriving at the look that your director wants, and how much you guys toil. Sometimes maybe, sleepless nights and all of that until you get that particular look. Talk to me a bit about that.
Well, I think it kind of goes that the larger the budget on a project, the more something will get honed in for a longer period of time. That a lot of times budgetary restrictions will shorten the amount of time a decision is made. But yeah, on big projects, often it's over and over and over. Ideally, it's nice when an image is chosen in a maquette phase. If it's regarding a creature, for example, that something full size wasn't made, and that something can be chosen from that maquette, and then the translation of that maquette is predictable, and then will become larger scale. Sometimes, and I do stuff that's a little different, like more character based with facial hair, for example. I just did a project where I think we went through several weeks of 4 different versions of facial hair and multiple colorings and multiple tests. But also sometimes it depends on actor availability and what the actor wants. It depends on who's wearing that makeup. So if they're a celebrity, if they're a bigger name, then sometimes their opinion will matter. So there's a lot of things to consider.
It's always collaborative and never one person's idea, unless you are dictator on set.
Well, but that's the beauty sometimes of working on low budget projects, is that while you might be limited budgetarily, it's a great opportunity to be able to have creative freedom and a good way to grow when you're in your beginnings of your career.
Yeah. Talk to me a bit about genre as well, because you said you were exposed to horror films at a younger genre, and you come across so many characters with prosthetics on and all of that. I'm pretty sure that's probably where your interest in the field kind of started too. So dealing with working on films of various genre, what's your favorite to work on?
I'm a fan of so much. I definitely like my fair share of science fiction as well, especially if they involve creatures. But I think that the name that always came up, generationally for me was Rick Baker, and working with Rick Baker was a huge accomplishment for me. That was very, very exciting. I like a lot of the work that he does. And I would say that while he does horror, that's not what he's exclusive to. He does kind of more creative stuff as, science fiction stuff, alien stuff as well. I definitely, when I look back to being a kid, I love a lot of 80s horror. I think the Alien franchise is fantastic. I like, a lot of Sam Raimi, old Peter Jackson. The Fly was Jeff Goldblum Fly was a big inspiration for me. So yeah, I as a viewer and as a fan, I think I like, I enjoy myself some gore, but also as a makeup artist, it's very rewarding sometimes to do more fantasy or science fiction, because oftentimes the makeup is extremely clean, and it's more critical, and that's kind of rewarding in itself to have to do a very clean, critical makeup.
How often do you kind of watch something new and go like, wow, that's something new, like when it comes to makeup, special effects, and how does that in turn kind of influence the work that you do?
I definitely from time to time see makeups that are, and I would say more like injury makeups or character makeups that I think are extremely clean and beautiful. But it's funny because a lot of times when that work is really great, it's so subtle you're not noticing it as much. Versus sometimes I will see a really great creature and I just love the creature design and I think it's unique, and it's hard, I think, at this point to be unique with creature design. And so I really enjoy seeing that. And it is tough sometimes for me, if I wasn't on the job, to be able to always tell what is practical, what is graphics and what is animatronics. I think, Stranger Things is a great example. I really loved the creature in that. I got to see a demo done with animatronics prior to that coming out, and it blew my mind. Some great animatronics work in that.
A demo of the Demogorgon.
Yeah, that was great.
Yeah. Moving forwards, you've been in the industry for quite a while now. Seeing how far you've come from back in the 2000s to now, it's the 2020s. How do you feel like your area of expertise has kind of evolved in terms of in terms of what you guys use, in terms of the applications, the techniques? How has that evolved, with every decade, I guess?
When I started, I would say a few things, and some of them are kind of mundane and might be boring for viewers. Like very kind of behind the scenes processes have become streamlined. A lot of the materials have improved. They've gotten better. I would say on an application, perspective, when I started, silicone prosthetics were pretty new to the industry, and foam prosthetics were still the kind of mainstay, were still the primary prosthetic used. And I would say now we're pretty far away from that. We're most of what we do is silicone based. I don't use a lot of foam, definitely much less foam now. Definitely the way that we make dentures has changed quite a bit. That has gotten a lot better, a lot more streamlined. And the a lot of the lab stuff, the giant stone molds that we used to make, we're not making as much anymore. So a lot of stuff's gotten stronger, more lightweight. A lot of it has actually gotten more expensive material wise, but it performs a lot better. So there's kind of a 50-50 there.
Speaking of materials and acquiring these now, over here in Sri Lanka, even like normal makeup it's kind of categorized under luxury items, so it's getting increasingly expensive day by day. So is it the same over there, or how is that? And like as a makeup artist, how do you decide on the materials that, all right, I need this and this for this particular character? How does that come about?
Well, again, I think budgetary constraints are always present. So that is a first decider sometimes of how you're going to approach something. I would say most of the bids that I'm going to be giving are based off of that. There are things that we can do to tweak cost and also time that things take to make, depending on what our depending on what those things are. But it's definitely expensive. It's not created for us. It's still a silicone wise, we have our own silicone that caters to our industry, but we're not a big enough industry for chemical companies to cater to us. So often we have to rob from kind of other places.
It's funny you said that, because that's all independent filmmaking is about, right? You don't necessarily get stuff that's manufactured for you. You just go borrow it or steal it from somewhere else.
The gold of filmmaking, you heard it here.
Exactly. We were talking earlier before the session started about how you cater to various locales, various environments. So if you are shooting in, say, a desert environment, you have a lot more, you got like various other problems to solve on set, or even like before. Maybe you're shooting in a cold climate and some things like freezing up, more problems. So filmmaking essentially is problem solving, and it kind of applies to whatever department you're in as well. So talk to me a bit about how you problem solve on set or even before.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up, because I had a challenge even moving from Los Angeles up north where I live now, because a lot of my cure times were different. A lot of my, even the moisture in the air was dramatically affecting the outcome of my materials. So it's an issue you kind of work through, but that's in the lab. When it comes to on-set application, as I told you before, it's not a pretty situation, but definitely people sweat. And in particular, silicone is very heavy and it's non-porous. So the body is unable to breathe and respirate properly. And depending on how much of the body is covered with silicone, we really need to be responsible and aware as makeup artists to take care of the person wearing that makeup. And, that might include a combination of using fans, of trying to cool them down whenever we can, making sure that they're staying hydrated. But, when it comes to touching up the makeup, we have lots of tricks depending on what's happening with the makeup for how we would approach trying to fix it. And we will definitely do the best we can to do constant touch-ups throughout the day to try to combat the environmental challenges.
Is there anything that kind of pisses you off on set when it comes to, like, let's say the director doesn't really know how long, a prosthetic is gonna take to apply, or like if someone doesn't necessarily know what your job entails, and they're like, all right, you know what, speed this process up. We need to like start rolling cameras soon. So I know most of the time, you have discussions about this in pre-production, but then on set, something that's always limited is time and money. So how do those two kind of like factor in, and how do you work around that?
Well, there's definitely assistant director department it's their job to keep people on schedule, and I have the utmost respect for them. And I think when you're on set and you're in that environment, I think we all love each other and care about each other, but sometimes we get short and we push it because we need to push it. But I like to tell them, you can ask me once and ask me how long it's going to take, and then you don't have to come back again into the trailer. Sometimes it's frustrating when I see them 5 more times in the same amount of time that I've told them I still need, but I understand. My only thing really with that maybe pisses me off when I'm on set is just that I think it's really important, again, going back to the safety thing, to advocate for the actors that are wearing the prosthetics. I think that sometimes, and even I can do this, that when you look at an actor who's in full prosthetics, you remove them from being a real human being. Even if you were talking to that person when they came in, you're talking to them the whole time, you saw their face when they walked in the trailer door, there is a weird disconnect that takes place when they become that character. And what I see sometimes happen on set is that people on set sometimes don't see them as a human. And so sometimes, even though they're carrying around 100 pounds worth of prosthetics, sometimes even if they are, overheating, or they're in a precarious situation that they need to be pulled out of immediately when we cut, sometimes people forget. And sometimes people cut and they don't pull them out, or they don't, grab them right away. And so that's the only thing that I sometimes will continue to remind, my AD about, is like, they need to be priority. We've got to get the head off of them, or we've got to get them a fan. That's the main thing.
I guess it adds to the discomfort if you are a stunt performer wearing prosthetics. Like it probably works for them too, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because the one interesting thing that happens is the glue down of the prosthetic creates essentially another skin layer. So when there's kind of more physical gags taking place, what you can see, if you're not careful, is blistering that will take place from those 2 layers rubbing. So there is kind of an extra element that you have to be careful of. They're definitely, stunt performers have it the worst.
So this is again something that I kind of like noticed recently on set. The one department that's actually concerned about the performers, the department who's most concerned about the performers, happens to be, funnily enough, the makeup department. And I mean, like, it's kind of like you guys empathize more with whoever was wearing what you put on them. So yeah, I totally get what you meant when you said, as soon as you cut the shot, like, you gotta take, prioritize certain people who are wearing prosthetics. So that's something that again goes overlooked, not by just audiences, but even by people on set. So,
right.
Yeah. Moving on to film versus TV? Again, I know budgetary and time constraints, but talk to me a bit about the key differences when it comes to makeup.
It's interesting because when I got into this business, television was not where the money was going. And, my aspirations as a kid were always set on film, I think primarily for that reason. But there's been a huge restructuring of streaming services now, and you've got really high-end productions like American Horror Story, for example, or like I said, Stranger Things, that are doing the type of effects that you typically wouldn't see on a television show. So I think it's neat now that we have so many more productions. There's so much more opportunity. I heard a statistic recently that there's twice as many TV shows now than there were a few years ago. And that doesn't surprise me at all. So I think it's a good opportunity. My quality that it doesn't get watered down because of that. I'm not sure what the future of that's going to change opportunity, and it means more potential work for more people, and I think a chance to do effects, to do quality effects on projects that were few and far between up until now.
Certainly, streaming has changed the game, and more so, I think, during the recent pandemic. You had more people in, at home binge watching stuff. So I guess kind of like the demands increase. So hopefully, there will be more opportunities in the future. And have you worked with makeup artists from various other regions from outside the continental US? And if you have, is that process any different from yours in drastic ways, or is it pretty much the same?
Well, I've worked with a lot of British makeup artists just in Los Angeles, and some European makeup artists. But I would say a couple things. One is that, internationally, I still think the US and England have an advantage as far as materials are concerned. And so when you look internationally to special effects, it just is a resource issue. And that's why, for example, I worked on a film as an effects supervisor in China for quite a while, with a lot of other Westerners as well, because they had such a challenge being able to source these materials. So we acted as both, kind of the coordinators of this because we knew the process, but we also hand carried the vast majority of what we needed there from the States, just because. So yeah, the approach, at least, in China, for example, was extremely different because they were trying to do the best with what they had.
Understandable. So, being in the US, you guys do have access to quite a lot of resources, and also hopefully perhaps for someone who's entering the field newly, you do have the necessary resources in terms of the prosthetics, all that stuff, but also education. So for somebody who's not from the US, how would you recommend that they kind of go about learning prosthetic makeup, all that stuff? Do you think online courses kind of suffice, or is there any other advice that you could kind of give them?
I think it's important to maximize the potential of where you are at any given time. And if that means that you are not in a position to come to the US or come to a market with a larger film community, then I would definitely absolutely take online courses. There's lots of great resources today, but Stan Winston is a fantastic one. They have pretty much anything you would want to learn. Again, you may be limited in materials, but at least you will understand the basics. And I would, what I did when I graduated high school, and I would recommend this as well, is to reach out to local universities. And I think that senior projects are a great way for you to, if to volunteer your time to start building a portfolio and basically, trade opportunities to mutually benefit one another. And, I also think reaching out to people, through social media or through whatever resources you have, if someone inspires you, I would definitely encourage people to reach out, and you might be surprised about the response you might get. And I know a lot of people that I looked up to getting into this business had personal letter responses, maybe from someone that they wrote a letter to in the 80s that wrote back, and that was their story. So I think it's just great to make those connections. And, it's cliche, but in Hollywood, networking is very important. So I think we have an opportunity today that we've never had, which is that we can network internationally. And I would absolutely maximize that.
100%. Talking about skills and networking is totally I think it's not just in Hollywood, but any industry wherever you are, irrespective of whether it's film or something else, networking, who definitely counts for a lot. And then when it comes to how you as a makeup artist, how you perform something, or maybe say a director, how they perform something, there's always that uniqueness that comes in, how you do it is going to be different from another makeup artist too. Maybe the materials are the same, but how you use it is obviously going to be different. What I'm trying to ask is, do you have any skills that were transferable, that kind of came from a different discipline that you brought over to makeup and prosthetics?
Yeah, I mean, indirectly, I would say I've always dabbled in makeup, but I also was fortunate to be raised with, an engineer father who was very hands-on. He did very different work. He was a machinist, but I do think that I had exposure to just putting my hands on things and making and building things, playing with clay, picking up a paintbrush. I never had a career per se doing any of this before, but I think that it's all tactile arts related. And I think really I've seen people get into my business much later in life. I've seen people get into makeup effects at 35 or 37, or one woman was 40. And she immediately, she went from the person that's coming to mind was a graphic designer until she was 39, decided to pick up and become a makeup artist, and did amazingly and became extremely successful with very little experience, because really what she had been doing for her professional life had way more benefit than she would have ever realized. And I think really nothing is a waste in that sense. Education gets us to the place where we're ready, and ready is different for everybody.
It's something that I've noticed more over here. You go to a film set and you have so many people who are on set working, but their primary job is not whatever department they're working in. They come from various other disciplines, and they bring something that's quite unique to the table, rather than, if you were straight up like, like you started off doing cinematography and, that's all you've been doing. But if you are like you said, your father was an engineer, someone comes from an engineering background who does cinematography, that kind of combines two different fields and at the same time, brings something wholly new to the table. So, and I guess that's kind of important in a way in a country like Sri Lanka, because you don't necessarily have that much support for filmmaking. So what would you tell people, whose career path it happens to be something else, but they have an affinity towards, a particular branch of filmmaking?
I think that goal needs to, become the hobby until it can become the end all. And so what that might mean is that, and I definitely did it in the beginning, which is that you work your day job, and that might mean that you take a night shoot because you have the opportunity, and it might mean a sacrifice on sleep, and it's not a great ideal. It's not a good long-term goal, but I think it's okay in the interim. And I've done lots of late nights, but it's again, very cliche, but if you're doing what you love to do, and if what you're doing lights you up emotionally, it's a worthy sacrifice. And I think you would figure that out really quickly. I think if you'd worked a whole day and you showed up to a film shoot, you would figure out very quickly if you could or couldn't keep doing it. And that's okay, but you'll figure that out. And if it's magic to you and you like being a part of that filmmaking process, then you will keep going. And eventually, when the portfolio builds and when the resume builds, you will be successful. It's inevitable.
And for someone who also wants to be in this particular industry, I guess resilience is a key component that they kind of gotta develop, I guess, because you're gonna hear the word no quite a lot. Mm-hmm. So anything that you could probably draw from personal experience about being resilient, we kind of like wrap up.
I will say one of the things that my instructor told me when I was in makeup school that always stuck with me, he said, you're going to end up in life on a plateau. And you don't know how long you're going to be on that plateau. You could be there for a week. You could be there for 5 years. But it's really important that you have your bags packed, because one day an airplane is going to come down and it's going to pick you up and it's going to take you to another plateau. And if you don't have your bags packed, you don't get to ride. And I think it's an important concept to look at, we're not given a certain structure of time period. We have to trust in the process. And the moment, when you trust in it, and the moment that plane comes and takes you to the metaphorical next plateau, I think that's when hopefully you will give yourself permission to keep trying.
That's valuable advice. Brilliant. Morgan, thank you so much for taking the time out of your night to do this. Hopefully you want to sleep.
Oh, that's perfect. You're a great moderator. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. People, that is Morgan Muta. Go check her out on social. I think you do have a makeup page on Instagram.
Yes.
And yeah, so she will hopefully be working on more TV series and films in the near future. And hope your vacation to Thailand goes pretty well. Enjoy the tropics, since you're going to be somewhere around this region. And also just plugging in Junkyard Theory here. So there's quite a number of filmmaker related interviews on Junkyard Theory. So do check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and on YouTube. So yeah, and thank you to everybody who tuned in. We do have two more discussions later this days around 4 p.m. and 9:30 p.m. So do stay tuned in. More people from the film industry coming up. So till then, goodbye, folks.
Thank you, Akash.